Video is sponsored by Alpha Draft, where you can play fantasy esports, including CSGO. In the past, you could bet on tournaments like the ESEA, ESL Pro League, HTC Invitational, all sorts of online CS tournaments, and you can win money, obviously, if you do well there. The description box will have a link if you want to sign up and go through my referral, give me some money as well. So the Cloud9 team, going back into its history, is the core of it being complexity beforehand. It has a long history of competing internationally outside of North American soil, and actually historically is the best team overall from North America in terms of consistent results. Okay, iBuyPower had that one major final they made, which Cloud9 never did in terms of international tournament, outside of NA at least. But overall, the one with the better results, the one that could routinely be expected to perform to a certain degree, was the complexity, was the Cloud9 lineup, which to some degree exists today. So seeing as the team with their newest lineup has only played in one tournament outside of NA, at Gfinity Spring Masters 2, and the next Gfinity is coming up this week, Gfinity Summer Masters 1, and combined with that Gfinity, there are going to be 4 international tournaments that we may well see Cloud9 at in the reasonably near future. So there's the Gfinity Summer Masters 1, which is this week. Then there's the Face It Finals, which is taking place at DreamHack Valencia. Then there's, assuming they qualify, ESL One Cologne, the next major in CSGO. And then there's Gfinity Summer Masters 2. So 4 big tournaments with most of them with a number of top 10 ranked teams. Obviously the major potentially could have every single top 10 ranked team. So this is a real chance to see what this Cloud9 lineup's made of. And so I wanted to contrast the history of the team, what they've done beforehand abroad, and then look at, well, what can we expect from that team. So we have to start out in the era when they were complexity. And this was in late 2013. The lineup was Nothing, Sean Gers, so those are the 2 that remain to today, into this current iteration of Cloud9. And then there was Hiko and Semphis, who obviously are the 2 who now play in Neolum, but were long-time members with the other 2. That was the 4-man core that remained for a long time in this team. And then the 5th player at the time was Swag. Now, the first big abroad tournament for them, big tournament abroad rather, to phrase it correctly, would be DreamHack Winter, the first major in CSGO history. Now, in the group stage, they had Very Games there, who were actually the best team in the entire world at the time. They'd been on a streak of beating NIP. They'd won a bunch of tournaments, somewhere NIP had been others. So they played them in this winners match on Inferno. And shockingly, Cloud9 actually won this game. It was a massive upset at the time. And they did it with this amazing round where they faked out, I can't remember if it was Swag who actually took the bomb. They faked out going into the B attack of Very Games, where Very Games were playing very passively off smokes, etc., waiting to do a full retake. And instead, the Cloud9, well, they were complexity at the time, went into the site, got fully into the site, and then snuck the other guy back down Banana and threw into the A site and planted. And they managed to win the round this way with this epic kind of fake play. And they got out of the group in first place. And so getting out in first place, what was crucial about that was because on paper, that was kind of a shoe-in that, okay, Very Games was going to get out of the group in first place. So getting out in first place actually meant that, first of all, Very Games ended up on the same side of the bracket as NIP, and those were the 2 best teams in the world at the time. And secondly, because you're on the other side of the bracket from the 2 best teams, now you've got a legit shot at going much further than you would have otherwise, because even if you somehow avoided NIP on the first round, which you would have done if you'd, which isn't necessarily the case because there's only 2 people, you got a 50% chance or something of getting someone like NIP in the first round. Say you avoid them, odds are in the semi-finals you're going to play someone like NIP, and it's going to be extremely difficult to go semis or further. But doing this set up a bracket where instead, here's the weird part, instead they had this much easier side of the bracket, but then actually they didn't actually get that much of an initial advantage because the team they drew in the quarterfinals, despite finishing in first, was the team that at the time was the 3rd best ranked team in the world, which was Astana Dragons, the team which now is the core of Hellraisers and previously was considered the super team of CIS because it took the 2 stars of Navi, Edward and Markelov, and it placed them with a bunch of the skilled players from Virtus Pro, which was a Russian lineup before, and so it had Dosia, Adren, Angel and Kutsha. That was right, those are the 3. Let me think, was that, yeah, I think this is the right period of time. Actually, Edward might have left at that point in time. I don't know, I'd have to think it through. Maybe not. Anyway, they got them in the round of 8, so they were still expected to lose at this point in time. But they actually managed to win the series. They came through on the 3rd map, it went the full 3 maps, and they won with superior strategy. They really anti-stratted the, well, I wouldn't say they fully anti-stratted. It looked more like Sean Gers just read the opponents pretty well. and they were able to really abuse some of the Aston Dragons players and get out of this game in a reasonably convincing third map. So they get into the semi-finals. They're already top 4 at the first major. The problem they had here was they met another surprise opponent. They met Fnatic there, and at the time, this Fnatic lineup, yes, they had been one of the better European teams, but they'd only just gotten their new in-game leader, Pronax. They'd only had him for one event, which is the MSI Beat event, where they'd got absolutely smashed by Very Games. So no one really knew what to expect from them, because they'd lost Modi, who was a very skilled player at the time, and Pronax wasn't a particularly skilled player, he was just an in-game leader. But obviously this Fnatic team went on to win the major, and in this semi-final, famously, I remember talking to Sean Gers about it afterwards, he'd spent all night, or however long they'd had before the semi, looking at all the demos of this team and trying super hard to hard counter anti-strat them. Not just anti-strat them like good tendencies, but he'd made the mistake of trying to literally find things like, right, well, when they do this, we're going to do this hard counter to it, they'll destroy it completely. And the problem was, if you know anything now, when we look back about the Fnatic style of play isn't based on like set strats that you run over and over, that are the old school ones that you can see in demos and you can go, right, well, they always do that. That's the problem. At the time, no one really had a feel for this Fnatic team, because it was the first time we really got to see them in a big tournament, like when they'd properly been in position, you know. They'd only had Pronax for something like 2 weeks. So obviously now we know Pronax is famous for these mid-round calls and changing it up. Well, unfortunately, Complexity didn't know that. So they tried these hard counters, and first of all, they probably would have lost this anyway. Fnatic was a better team. I mean, they did go on to win the major. But secondly, when they tried these hard counter approaches, Fnatic did almost none of the things they'd practiced for, changed everything up, and almost sort of like faked them into doing hard counters, which didn't work at all. And so Fnatic absolutely smashed Collar. I think it was something like 6-8 on both of the maps, and even including Inferno, which was the map that Complexity had won against Very Games. So even though they got top 4 at the big major, still the best result by a North American team ever at a major, by the way, it still was kind of like, it was a disappointing end, because it was like, okay, you weren't even facing, like in the other semi-final, it was Very Games Nip, so everyone thought, well, that's the team that's going to win the tournament. So this still, even though I had Fnatic as a favourite, it still was a good chance for Complexity to maybe even make the final after all that they'd accomplished, beating Aston Dragons, beating Very Games in that one map, but they couldn't do it. Okay, so that was kind of the high watermark. Like, okay, hey, maybe this team can be a contender if things go right way. So coming into 2014, the next major is the next foreign tournament. So they go to EMS One Katowice. It was in March of 2014, and in the group stage, they actually have a reasonably decent group, because obviously being a top 4 seed, they've been seeded in as the number 1 seed in their group, so they're going to get a group that they should be able to get out of, and they do. They have a group that contains LGB, which was like all of them, Crims, Twist, those guys, Dennis, some of them now in Fnatic, and it had Clan Mystic, which at the time was like Kenny S and a bunch of other people, and it had Na'Vi, and at the time, Na'Vi did have Guardian, but Na'Vi didn't go crazy and become really sick until like a month or so later, like a month, 2 months later, when they won that Star Series. So at the time, Na'Vi was just like a decent team. In fact, they'd gone out of the group stage of the last major, but they'd now got Guardian. And in the group stage, they just beat Clan Mystic, Kenny S's team, reasonably easy. They lost to LGB, who obviously would go on to be very good and actually got to the semi-finals and were the only team to take a map off Virtus Pro, the eventual winners. They lost to LGB, but in the last match of the group, they played Clan Mystic again. They beat them again, this time a little closer game, but they still beat them. Now, this got them out of the group in second place. And now, getting out in second place, they got kind of the punishment that they might have gotten at the last major if they hadn't beaten Very Games, which is they had to play NIP in the first round of the playoffs. And at the time, NIP was the number 2 ranked team in the world still. Now, on this series, they, again, for one map, could be brilliant. They managed to beat NIP on DOS 2, which is kind of one of the better maps for Complexity at the time. Famously, it was mainly the result of Swag going absolutely nuts in terms of kills, and he had like a crazy, I think it was like a 1v3 or 1v4 that he won, starting with the Deagle, which is absolutely nuts. And so, unless I'm mistaken there, but they won map 1, so you're thinking, right, well, the one map up, okay, hey, maybe they can win this in 3. I mean, it is NIP after all. The problem is, at the time, there was only 5 maps, and NIP was amazing at all 5, so you were never going to get an easy map. Like, it's not like you could win map 1 and go, right, and then map 2 is a good one for us. You're going to have to go super hard to win it 2 maps against NIP. The problem is, map 2 was Nuke. Now, historically, this was a good map for Cloud9, Complexity at the time. The problem is, NIP were one of the gods of Nuke, and so NIP absolutely wrecked them. I think it was like 16-2 or something on Nuke. So immediately, that whole thing of like, wow, we're ahead on map 1, we could do this, that's done already. They lose map 2 super hard, and then map 3 was like a convincing, not super wreckage like that, but a convincing win for NIP. And NIP move on, NIP go to the final. NIP obviously up until the final looked superb, and then NIP finished second place. So a round of eight finish. Bearing in mind iBar Power had gone out in both of the group stages, their rivals. This looked like another good result, a solid result for these guys. So the problem is, what's the basis of your hope for the future on that result? Well, oh, we've got this swag guy, he's like a rising star. Look at this great one map he's had against NIP. One of the best teams in the whole world, would go on to be the best team in the next few months. Hey, if we can build on that, maybe Dust 2 can be a home map for us, we can improve our nuke, Swag can continue to grow. Then Swag leaves the team, basically. So they lose Swag, and the next international tournament they play is the next major, actually. It's ESL One Cologne, which is in August of that year. So moving forwards, now, instead of Swag, they'd had Anger for a while for ESEA, but now they've got Shroud, and this is Shroud's breakout international tournament. He's never played a big international tournament, he's only played at ESEA before this. Now in the group stage, because they only finished in the round of 8 in the second one, they're going in as a 2nd/3rd seed, and so as a result, they're not necessarily favoured to get out. It's going to be maybe a bit of a struggle. Then you look at their group, and they get drawn with Titan, who at the time, Shox has left, but they've got Kenny S there, and they've had a bunch of recent very solid performances against top teams, so they've got MBK, Smiths, all those guys. They look really dangerous. They've got Dignitas, who's a confirmed top 4 team, finishing top 4 at the last major at Copenhagen Games. So in theory, these two teams should beat Complexity. Oh, it's Cloud9 now, actually. They've just changed to Cloud9 before this tournament. They should beat Cloud9, and Cloud9 probably shouldn't make it out of this group and shouldn't be able to make another bracket run, but they do. They beat Titan in this crazy overtime game. They beat Dignitas in an overtime game. These amazing performances to overcome 2 of the top elite European teams, and they get out of the group in 1st place. Now, here's where you just don't catch a break sometimes in life. So remember all the good fortune of the first tournament where you got out in 1st place, but then you didn't catch a break because you got the 3rd best team in the round of 8. And you remember the second major, you got out in 2nd place, and this time you get one of the best teams. I mean, actually, since the number 1 ranked team, Titan, at the other major hadn't gone out the group stage, you got literally the highest ranking team in the round of 8. Well, this time you get out in 1st place, and your reward is you get NIP. On paper, still ranked the number 1 in the world in terms of how the rankings work, even though they had a couple of bad results recently. Now here's where the positive of it is. NIP hadn't looked great in their group stage, and now going forwards from that, because they'd lost to Epsilon, now going forwards from that, NIP, because of their recent performances, this looked like a very beatable NIP. NIP looked wounded, they looked vulnerable. It looked like, hey, if they lose this tournament and go out now, I wouldn't be surprised if roster moves had happened then instead of months later, Fiflaren going or someone else going. So in this particular matchup, this is their best chance to make like a semi since the first major. On the first map, it's Nuke. Remember the one they'd gotten Shrek'd by NIP on at the previous major? Now this time around, this is a different NIP. This NIP isn't that strong. This time, it's actually Cloud9 who wrecks. They win like 16-8 or something on Nuke. It's a big time result. Next map is Dust 2. This is their chance. Dust 2 is a strong map for them. They've just won on Nuke already. Dust 2 in theory is one of the ones that you can get wins off NIP on. They always play people fairly close on that. They weren't that dominant on it, especially not anymore. And in recent time they'd had a lot of trouble on it. They lost to Epsilon on it, a bunch of different teams. So this looks like a possible win. Cloud9's actually getting going. It's going deep into the game. They've got a real chance, but NIP just manages to pull it out. And it's a 16-14 win for NIP, and we go to a third map. Third map, this was the first major to use the random map selection for that final map, and this was the first major to use Cobblestone and Overpass, the old Cobblestone Overpass. The random map selection had picked Cobblestone. Like, almost no one's played it. In fact, NIP had played it in the group stage and lost on it to Epsilon. So no reason to think NIP's going to win this. Even if Cloud9 don't know the map, they should still be able to win by being the superior team, which they were at this time. They had the better playing stars. They had Hiko and Shroud really going off. They had a better strategical approach. NIP was still using that old default style, and really their stars were up and down, and they actually were lacking. They didn't have that consistent star power, firepower that you thought of with the old NIP, where they could always win from that. So in this game, first half goes okay. I think Cloud9 gets like 8 CT rounds. Second half, they're actually they're getting up there. It looks like they're going to do it. They keep forcing NIP into these bad economical situations. But this whole game, this heartbreaker of a game for Cloud9 is just defined by Get Right first and foremost. But Get Right and Freiburg just have these heroic rounds where they just do unreal shit in like the connector room into the A site. And they just managed to hold off these crazy rounds, and they managed to get in there and lurk and get these pick-off kills that make Cloud9 more and more hesitant to play against him, and knowing he can be behind every single corner because there's so many nooks and crannies on the map, and they're going slower and slower, so that by the time they do attack, the clock's really running down, and then Nip get a heroic play. And then obviously there's this final crazy play where Forrest had like a swag 7 or whatever it is, and he managed to hold them off for a bunch of time instead of letting them plant. And the whole thing, it's like everything went right for Nip in heroic fashion. Amazing plays, but completely pulled out of the bag, and everything went wrong for Cloud9. They lost the series, and they had to go out in the round of 8. But this time, this was a totally unconvincing round of 8 because I hate to use the term should, but okay, the likelihood was, if you looked at the way the series played out beforehand, that they would have won the series. After map 1, that they would have won the series. On map 2, they very likely could have won the series. Map 3, they definitely could have won the series, but it's like every time Nip just summoned these amazing rounds to survive, and Nip obviously won both their maps 16-14, whereas the map that Cloud9 had won had been 16-8, it'd be complete wreckage. So I can see why you'd be very disappointed if you were Cloud9 here. And the problem here is, again, what are you going to take from this to the next event and think, right, well, we've got some positives to build on. So the problem is, the positive is, right, strategically, we're pretty sound. Our star players, Hiko and Shroud, are playing at a top level, especially the Shroud guy. He's like the new swag for us. He's this new breakout player who's having really great games. If we can keep that at the same level, build up some of the rest, maybe we can be better next time. That's where the problem comes in. Because then we come to Face It Season 2 a couple of months later. I think it was October, and the previous major had been in August. So a couple of months later, we come for this 3-tournament span in Europe where they're going to play Face It, ESWC, and DreamHack Winter. DreamHack Winter will be the last major of the year. So Face It Season 2, they're in a group that has LDLC and Virtus Pro. And the way the group worked, it was 3-team groups, and the top 2 make the playoffs. And what you do is you play 2 maps against each opponent. So round robin style. So the first set they had to play LDLC, who at the time is like a top 2, top 3 team in the world. They lose heavily to LDLC on Inferno. They had like a reasonably close game with Dusty, but they lose both maps there. So immediately they're already in trouble. Now against Virtus Pro, because Virtus Pro also lost to LDLC, they basically only have to win 1 map to have a chance to get through, because they'll be tied with Virtus Pro then, even if Virtus Pro win the other map. But then they have to win based on round difference overall in the group or something. So the first map, they win it. They win cash 16-11 against Virtus Pro, who actually at the time was considered a very good cash team. So that's quite impressive. And they did it mostly on the T side. And then on Inferno, which is the second map, which they always claimed was one of their best maps. They always told me, oh, that's one of our best maps. And I always said, I don't know, your CT, you haven't got at the time, their skill level wasn't as good as it had been at ESL One Cologne, especially relative to the other top teams. And this was the CT meta that had just come in really heavily of Inferno, LDLC, Fnatic, Dignitas being the gods of the CT side of Inferno. So on this map, you have to get a lot of CT rounds. In the first half, they get 6 CT rounds, so you're pretty much done already right there. You're not going to get the round difference, and then they get 0 T rounds. So added to that, it's just game over already. So they're out of that tournament. They don't make the playoffs of this one, which was actually, let me think, it was the first time in a tournament abroad that they hadn't made a playoff stage, which would become the trend you'd now see. And that whole Inferno scenario, playing Virtus Pro and Cash, would be trends that would reoccur in terms of how this next story would play out. So ESWC is right after that, a few weeks later. ESWC... in ESWC, you play a lot of international tournaments, so they beat up all these international teams that are just nobodies. They managed to beat Virtus Pro again, same exact score, 16-11 cash, great win again. It's like, wow, they've got a home map, maybe they can work on this. Then they lose to LDLC heavily on Inferno, another Inferno loss. And here's the problem, because Virtus Pro had beaten LDLC in a close overpass game, again, round difference means they don't go out of the group, and for a second tournament, they don't make it to the playoffs. So already there's problems going on here. And in terms of the players in the team, Shroud is still decent, but he's cooling off quite a lot. Hiko was slumping. After Face It, he really started to slump pretty hard. He was having his issues, and the team in general just looked quite bad, actually. And Nothing at the time was really having issues, but he hadn't really been that great for most of it. It's mainly been the ESEAs and home tournaments where he'd had the beast performances in NA. So we come to the last event of the year, DreamHack Winter 2014. A year removed from when they'd made the semis of that major. Now they get placed into a group that has Fnatic, the best team in the world, by far at the time, in dominant form. We're coming off 3 straight tournament wins. They have Bravado, which is a South African team, and they had Hellraisers. And Hellraisers at the time has gotten Simple into their lineup now, and they're looking decent, but it's been a while since they've been a top team. So in theory, when you look at that, okay, it should be possible for Cloud9 to maybe beat Hellraisers. Definitely they should be able to beat Bravado. So this is maybe doable to get out of this group. It's not unreasonable, even with their slump, that they could get out of this group in second. Now, it starts out, they play Hellraisers. Oh, look, it's Inferno. Oh, look, they're on CT side. Again, Inferno and CT side of Inferno lets them down massively. They don't have the firepower to stand against these top European teams, and they don't have the proper roles within the team to be able to play effectively on CT side here. And they get absolutely smashed. I think they got like 2 rounds out of 15 on CT. It was 2 or 3, something crazy, but they got utterly wrecked. So they lose that map big time. Then they play Bravado, the South African team. They smashed them. That wasn't really a surprise. So then in the final game, here's the unfortunate thing. Turns out Hellraisers has shocked Fnatic and beaten them 16-14 on Mirage. So now they have to play Fnatic, the best team in the world, in the last map to get out of the group. Last map comes up to be Dust. In past, that would have been a strong map for this team. It's one that they've done a lot of their work on in the past. So can they do it this time? No, they get utterly smashed. I think they got like 5 rounds and they're out of the tournament in last place. Not in last place, I guess Bravado's in last place. But they don't make the playoffs for 3 straight offline tournaments in Europe in a row. So you can already see the problems here. You can actually see why at this point in time, Hiko decides, I'm going to go, I'm going to make the super team with iBuy Power. So he goes out of the lineup. They eventually get in Shazam to replace him, and we go into 2015. Now in 2015, they play the offline qualifier for ESL One Katowice. It's now ESL One, not EMS One, note. And this is very easy, actually. They beat like the Polish InShock team, which I think was Lord's team, and they beat Mouse Sports, so they qualify quite easily. Then the major comes, ESL One Katowice 2015. And this is the first big international tournament outside of NA with Shazam. In the group stage, they've got TSM and Virtus Pro in their group. So already you're figuring they're not going to get out of this group, because VP's still a solid top 4 team, even though admittedly at this point in time, VP's had some slump results actually, and had some actually, was this the period when they'd had the slump results? I think they do. I don't know, I'm misremembering that, but I'm fairly sure they had, because they'd had Asus Rogue, they hadn't even got out of the group stage. So VP's actually in theory a bit vulnerable, and in the past obviously other Cloud9 lineups with Hiko obviously had been able to beat VP a bunch of times, so hey, maybe they can win a map off them. TSM, they had beaten TSM when they'd been Dignitas the year before, ESL One Cologne. But TSM now had looked very strong, because at MLGX Games Aspen at the end of January, TSM had finished 3rd and even beaten Fnatic in a best of 3 and looked quite strong, and in fact beaten Cloud9 in the group stage there. So it's going to be hard to get out of this major group. In the first game though, they play TSM on Nuke. Now yes, way back in the mists of time, like 8 or 9 months before, yes, Cloud9 had been a strong team on Nuke, but Nuke was always the strong Dignitas and TSM maps. CT side especially, they were monsters. Now what's funny is TSM starts CT side, they get up a big score, I think it was like 12-3 or something, 11-4, one of those, and Cloud9 switches over to the CT side, and they managed to do the same and better to TSM, and they win with their own CT epic performance and win 16-14, so they've had another big upset. Hey, maybe they're going to get out of the group this time, because now they just have to beat Virtus Pro in one of maybe 2 games even, depending on how it goes between the other 2. They play, let me think. So then in the next match, they play Virtus Pro, and they play them on Nuke. So hey, we're even on Nuke. Maybe Nuke's going to be our strong map now. No, this time VP beats them like handedly on Nuke. Not a massive result, but handedly. So in the deciding game, they have to play TSM again. This time the map goes to Overpass. Now on Overpass, you remember Days made his video about Shazam and his issues there. They were quite terrible on this Overpass. When you look at the way they played it, they fucked up so many 1vx situations, 2vx situations, that in no sense of the word did they deserve to win this game. And so they lost, and TSM went through instead. Now what's interesting there, by the way, is if they'd have won that deciding game, people probably didn't think of this because they never got to the round of 8, but they would have actually played NIP in the round of 8 there. So that would have just been an interesting little factor, that they would have played in 3 majors in a row. But they did, well, I guess it wouldn't have, because DreamHack Winter wasn't a major, but they would have played them again in a major round of 8. So that didn't happen anyway. They went out of another tournament in the group stage, 4 straight European tournaments in the group stage. They've gone out now. Now we come to Gfinity Spring Masters once. Shazam's still in the lineup. This was the tournament where half of the field wasn't that great actually. Like they played in the group, they had Orbit and VP, And against Orbit, the first map, amazingly, nothing goes absolutely off. One of the best games I've ever seen in Play Europe on Cash. It drops like 50 kills in an overtime game that they lose. But they managed to win the next 2 maps. Okay, fair enough. They, as far as I can remember, I think they just lost outright to VP. So I think that wasn't much. They go into the semi-finals, and unfortunately they have to play Envious because they've come out in second. And Envious at the time is in sick form. This would be going to be a bunch of tournaments they would win and look very dominant because no Fnatic there. So Envious beats them convincingly, not like a total wrecking, but convincingly. And in the third place decider, VP beats them convincingly as well. Now at the time, yeah, not a good result. It's 4th overall, so that sounds decent. But again, the field wasn't very good below them. VP even had a stand-in, so that even means like you can't take much. You can't be like, oh wow, at least you lost to VP. Yeah, but even VP, they had a stand-in player. They didn't even have one of their main players. In fact, I think Snacks they didn't have their best player. So there was also the issue that I don't take too much away from them in terms of that performance, because it was true that was the event where the booths weren't quite big enough at that one Gfinity, which they fixed for the next one. So one person, I think 1 or 2 people had to like use the keyboard on their lap. So okay, fair enough, it wasn't normal conditions. So they finished 4th there. Now then, this is where they kick out Semphis, they kick out Shazam, they bring in Freakazoid from the mists of nowhere way back in time to be this entry fragger, and everyone's like, what the fuck, where's he coming from? But he's going to be this dedicated entry fragger, and they pay big money, one of the biggest signing fees ever in CSGO history and CS history, to get Skadoodle, a guy who, yes, he's had months off because of the ban of a bunch of his teammates from iBuyPower, and he has been teamless, but previously the best NA player, along with Hiko, like the best, and probably the best in terms of impact, because he's an AWPer, and he can have incredible AWP, and he's had some good results abroad when he played for iBuyPower in terms of AWPing, going up against Kenny S, the likes of these players. So this is their first international test with this lineup. So Spring Masters 2, it's the one where the group stage was a best of 2, and you had like 5 teams in each group, so you play 4 best of 2s, and the top 2 teams out of each group go through to the playoffs. So in this particular tournament, fairly unconvincing performance from Cloud9. Yes, it's a new lineup. Yes, they've already just gone to their first international tournament, but they don't win a single map off Virtus.pro. Okay, Virtus.pro is still a good team. They don't win a single map off them. Virtus.pro end up going to the final. They don't win a single map of Envious, who at the time, yes, obviously previously had been like the 2nd best team in the world. They're still ranked number 2 at the time. They can't win a single map off them, and they don't win. Here's the problem: they don't win a single map off Titan. Now, it's one thing to not get anything off Virtus.pro, they're a strong team. Not get anything off Envious, they're still elite team in terms of the talent level. But at the time, Titan, they were good, but they weren't. It shouldn't have been impossible to beat Titan on that. They couldn't win a single map off Titan either, so they go 0-6 against those the 3 top teams in their group. As a result, they don't get out, and they're not even close to getting out. One of the other interesting trends at this tournament was the one thread that constantly repeated through all their series is they always wanted to play everyone on Cash. Cash was a map they always wanted to play, and they never won any of these Cashes against Virtus.pro, Envy, or Titan. They never got a Cash against them. So at this point in time, you have to ask yourself, as you did in the past, what are the positives of the team? Like, what is the set map that they're good at? What side are they good at? It's hard to tell based on that tournament, because if Cash is the map they like the most, well, they're not doing very well on it. They're not winning it. So where's the basis? Where's the base from which to build up into something, into being an elite international team? So now we've got the history of the team. The same lineup as went to that Gfinity is the one that's going to Gfinity Summer Masters 1 later this week. So, in fact, I'll just take a look quickly at the group that they're in. So they're in Group B, which contains, are you ready? Envious, Virtus.pro, Mouse Sports. Now, when you think about what I just said, that means obviously it's not unreasonable to say that recent history tells us they won't get out of the group, because Virtus.pro and Envious were those 2 teams who convincingly beat them at the last Spring Masters. Now then, with that said, Mouse Sports, that's a very winnable series right there. I don't think it's something ridiculous to think that they could win that. Now, what could they do in terms of, like, which of those 2 are the most likely for them to be able to beat? Now, the problem here is that Envious, yes, has had some issues, but just the sheer talent level in Envious, especially the aim of certain players like Shox and Kiyoshima, they're the kind of players that historically I always thought kind of intimidated the players from Cloud9 and Complexity, where it was hard for the stars of those Complexity Cloud9 teams to think, like, even if I can get someone, even if I can do well against this guy, how are my teammates going to do against them? We're going to get torn up to a degree. So yeah, Hiko at his peak at ESL One Cologne looked great, and he could perform very consistently against them. And yes, Shroud had that one tournament where he looked super sick against them. But how is Skadoodle going to do against Kiyashima, against Shox? How are they going to do against Snacks, against Pasha or Bialy? To me, there's too much talent there. Then you add in the tactical element of which of these teams are they tactically better than. Now, yes, Envious has their issues, but there's certain maps, DOS 2 is obviously a great example, in the past, Cash, where they'll wreck teams like Cloud9. So it's hard to know what maps they're going to get these teams onto, unless they've been playing Train, unless they've been playing Cobblestone, unless they've been playing Overpass to get those ready enough that they could get some kind of strange picks into these teams, which might be an approach to you. But then again, VP's been playing Train, so it's going to be hard to see how they get out of this group. So ignoring that one, you then look at the other tournaments. They've got the Face It finals, they've got ESL One Cologne, the next major, assuming they should qualify, obviously, and then Gfinity Summer Masters too. Now let's think about the expectations for this team, both historically and now. What's a realistic prediction for these sorts of tournaments? Right. Well, I don't know all the field of the next Face It and the next Gfinity for obvious reasons. For me, a realistic expectation for this team, and they've got 4 lands they're going to play here, would be that out of the 4, maybe they could make top 8 runs. I mean, remember, some of these tournaments only have top 4, like Gfinity, etc. But let's say they could make top 8 runs at like any. Okay, so at ESL One Cologne, I'd say realistic would be that they'll have a chance to get out of their group. But thinking of how the groups will probably go, there'll probably be a 50-50 in terms of getting the second spot. But so a realistic expectation is either go out in the group stage, close loss, or make it to the quarterfinals and lose there. Now in tournaments like Gfinity's, now it's realistic that they're just going to go out in the group stage. And that, yeah, there's teams they could battle here, but it's not that likely that they actually will beat them and that they will get out of it. It's a GSL style system. You might have to play the second best team in the group twice. It just doesn't seem that likely to make it out. It's possible, but if they did, they would definitely not win the semi-final. So that's the realistic scenario. What is the best case scenario? If everything goes great, then, yeah, like I say, they could make the round of 8 of a major. Hey, is there an opponent they could play in a round of 8 of a major that they could win and get to the semi-final? Excluding ridiculous upsets, which I obviously can't predict and can't know, unless they have some crazy map, like unless they can play an opponent that never plays something like Train, they can get it onto that without that being banned away. So you have to have an opponent that has 2 bad maps. I don't think they actually could. I don't think they could get to the semi-final. I think round of 8 is the best case scenario for a major. That's the best case example. And I think worst case for a major is to actually, it's actually possible in this day and age with how many good teams there are, to go out, if not 3rd in the group, or even 4th. Probably not that likely 4th, because I'm thinking of some of the teams that go, there might be other NA teams, there might be international teams there, so probably 3rd's a worst case scenario in a group. At these Gfinities, obviously finishing last's the worst case scenario. It's doable at some of them, depending on the probably not at this one with Mouse. I think it's not that likely Mouse beats them, but hey, it's not ridiculous. At the summer one, if the teams are stronger, yes, you could go out in last place. So actually, unfortunately, I don't think this is a team that's going to be making top 4s at big international tournaments. Now, at Gfinity's, top 4 is not ridiculous, but still unlikely because of the format and the level of teams. Like in this first one, you have to play Envious and Virtus Pro. So I think historically, it's not that dissimilar to what the old Cloud9 used to be, the old Complexity used to be. The problem is, obviously, that at their best, as I'm described in the history there, you saw all these opportunities where some of those teams could have gone a bit further, where obviously ESL One Cologne, they could have got to the semi-finals or further, maybe to the final even. At the other one, hey, maybe they could have beaten Fnatic or taken Fnatic to 3 maps at the first major and gone to the final on that one. There's a bunch of chances where they could have gone further, and there's times when they did terribly when they were slumping, when they didn't go very far at all. Now I think they're back to being in the middle of they can do as well as the best teams, not semis, but they can do as well as those round of 8 finishes. It's just that they're not even going to be the team that has the chance to have gone for it. It's not going to. They're probably going to lose in unconvincing fashion like that. So as it is right now, that's how I see the lineup. Skadoodle has to get a lot better, and even so, he'd still, to me, just be filling the spot of what Swag used to do for them, of what Shroud did for them, of what Hiko did for them. And even then, that wasn't enough before. And now, with how strong the top sort of 6 to 7 teams are in Europe, it's going to be very hard to make any top 4s. So round of 8's probably the end for Cloud9 right now. That's just the iteration they have right now and what I've seen from the team at the moment, Cloud9.